The question is, in your work as Deputy Supervisor of the Domestic Violence Division of the State's Attorney's Office, are there programs and safeguards put in place to protect and represent women, children, and even men who are victims of domestic violence?
The policy of the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, which was one that was somewhat interesting to me, and just as a little background, I've been in the prosecutor's office now for almost 11 years, and as of January of this year, I was made the Deputy Supervisor of the Domestic Violence Division without having actually ever worked in a domestic violence courtroom. And when I was called down for that position, I again giggled and I said, but I've never worked domestic violence. They said, that's okay, you'll do fine. So in the work that I've done in the courtrooms, I've actually, when I sat and reflected on it, there are tons of cases that I've prosecuted in my respective courtrooms that were domestic related. But once it gets to the felony level, there's no distinction between a domestic violence courtroom or just going to a courtroom. So I realized that I really did have experience. However, once I went down to the division that is dedicated to domestic violence, as a prosecutor, my initial inclination was that if a woman came to court, and it floored me sometimes, even prior to going to the division during weekend bond court, where a lady would step up and her eye is purple and blue, and she's just badly battered, and she says to me in front of the judge, I want to drop charges. And I never, ever, ever understood that as a woman. I didn't understand that. What I learned, and at that point, I would tell her, well, we have to get a court date, and if you want to drop charges, you should talk to the prosecutor in that particular courtroom. And I told my boss, I said, if you ever put me in that division, I'll lose my job, because I didn't understand it. However, being in a division, what I've learned about the policy of my office is that we're not there to tell these women when is the right time for them to get out of a relationship. That's a decision that they have to make. So it's not our policy in the office to do anything to force that woman to proceed with charges. Now, we do have in our office what's known as an E-based prosecution, which means that we can proceed on certain cases without the cooperation of the victim. And that happens in instances, and it's very rare, because most men or women, for that matter, who batter their significant others don't do it in front of an audience. However, there are rare instances where it does happen in front of someone else, and we are allowed to proceed without the benefit of that victim if we so choose. However, it is the policy of our office to allow the victim to control when, where, and how she wants to deal with this case that's been brought before us. And that's been something that was kind of hard for me to embrace, but I understand it. Because the mere fact she didn't ask to be there, or he didn't ask to be there as a victim, it's something that someone else put on them because they chose to show their need for control by abusing that woman or abusing that man, and now they find themselves in court, and we're not going to re-victimize them by forcing them to now testify against this person unless it's something that they choose to do. Now, what we will do is we offer services, and there are so many advocacy agencies out there that are there to protect the victim, can give the victim options, that can give shelters. We have a victim witness program, and we also have several advocacy agencies that actually work outside of the building. We also have a program that's called a TAC program, which is our target abuser call. And these are specialized attorneys that deal with situations where there are certain people, whether it be the victims or the offenders, that have been identified as repeat offenders or repeat victims. And those cases are given to a special caseload of attorneys who have the experience, the knowledge to deal with the types of cases where a woman may really be reluctant, but we have identified the case as something that if someone doesn't intervene and show this woman that there's all of these other services out there, then she's going to end up dead. And that happens sometimes. It happens that, we fear that if we don't do something, this woman will not make it to her first court date. So we do have specialized attorneys that deal with those types of cases. Obviously, by way of statute, there are orders of protections that can be put in place to attempt to protect a victim of domestic violence. Those orders of protections you can get those by way of a criminal prosecution or a civil prosecution. So if a woman feels in fear for her safety, she can go and she can ask a judge to sign an order to say that she doesn't want this person to have any contact with her. There has to be a domestic relationship, however, and she can also do that without bringing criminal charges through the civil courts. And there are 555 West Harrison is where the domestic violence division is, and then there are district courts throughout the suburbs, and the closest one being the Markham Courthouse. And Monday through, actually 7 days a week, if someone wants to get an order of protection, they are allowed to do that. There are also special conditions of bond, which, again, like an order of protection, is simply a piece of paper. But it's a judge essentially telling someone what you're supposed to do while this case is pending. Now, as it relates to all of these safeguards that are in place, the bottom line is once it gets to the point that you're dealing with the criminal justice system, number one, it's just a piece of paper when it relates to an order of protection or a sheet with special conditions of bond. And number two, it's our hope that, this person who has decided to abuse the significant other is going to abide by these terms, is going to listen to a judge when a judge says, this is how you are to conduct yourself from this point on. And the unfortunate thing is that it's up to that individual to decide to do right or do wrong. And we're talking about the same person who may have stabbed his significant other, may have shot her, may have stalked her for years, for months. And all of a sudden, because the judge is now telling you this is the way you're going to conduct yourself, we're relying on him to do that. That may not always happen. So we have statutory guidelines or safeguards to try and protect the woman, protect the children that are victims of domestic violence. There are also, as I indicated, the conditions of bond and the orders of protection. But at the end of the day, it's not going to stop someone from doing what they ultimately want to do. And it's unfortunate. We had, I believe in the last week and a half, in the Chicagoland area, there were 6 domestic murders. The legislators have saw fit that if there's an order of protection in place and that victim is, despite the order of protection, killed by her abuser, that makes it a death penalty case. But there are a lot of safeguards in place post-crime. And there's not a lot of safeguards out there pre-crime. And I think that, that is sort of the focus of today's panel. And we talk about the state of the black family. By the time you get to me, I'm not going to say it's too late, but by the time you get to me, the harm has been done. And now you're looking for, some authority, the great judges that are out there in black robes to now tell you how you have to conduct yourself. And as we all know, it's not going to always happen. That's why we have the call with the tax attorneys, because there's so many repeat offenders. There's not a lot of funding out there for programs that women or men can go to when they've been victimized by domestic violence. And a lot of times they tell them, well, is there a pending case? What can we do? There are hotlines out there, but the bigger problem is that a lot of women, which is consistent with the policy of our office, a lot of women are not interested in testifying against their abuser or doing anything that's going to cause what they would see as further harm. A lot of times when the woman finally calls the police, the abuse has been ongoing, that woman feels severely threatened for her life. He's told her over and over, if you do anything, if you come to court, he tells her what the consequences are going to be. These women, they believe it. These women, and when I say women because statistics show that 90% of domestic violence victims are women. So I am not in any way not acknowledging that victims of domestic violence can be men also.
Mrs. Martin,
I'm sorry. Okay. But the bottom line is the women who are victims of domestic violence are not very eager to leave that situation until they know that there are resources out there that's going to help them. And those resources include housing, how am I going to pay my bills, where am I going to live, you know, who's going to pick up my kids from school because I don't get off work till 5 o'clock. And a lot of times that abuser is that person. So as it relates to whether or not there are safeguards in place, there are statutory safeguards in place. But I don't think that it's enough. I think that as a community, we need to come together and figure out how these resources can be allocated so that the woman knows that she has some place to turn. Right now, there are approximately 100 beds in the Chicagoland area in shelters for women of domestic violence. 100. And statistics show that 1 in every 3 women at some point in their life have been abused by their husbands or their boyfriends at some point in their life. So you do the math. There's 100 beds out there. We need more resources and more outreach so that these women have some place to turn to.
Thank you. We're going to move to talk about men and women in the workplace. And
May I please
I'm sorry.
make a comment?
Yeah.
I don't want to seem like I have to say something every time someone speaks, but there's so much that I hear and see and feel from these wonderful participants, and we're all at this level. But the core problem, before it gets to men and women like this, is not being adequately addressed. You know, the Bible puts it very clear, and I am just appalled that those of us who are pastors and preachers and teachers don't see how the God Himself has offered us solutions to all these problems if we would but read what we have on our shelves, gathering dust, and begin to practice it. I'm going to give you a simple example. The Bible says in the book of John, in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And that Word, through that Word, all things were created. And then it says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among men. There are many interpretations of that. But let's go to violence and domestic violence and the power of a word to kill. We're looking at guns. We're looking at knives. But we overlook speech and the power of a word to destroy the spirit of love, the power of a word to suggest to a mind that it is less, the power of a word. That's violence at the most intimate level. We are not careful how we talk to one another. And that kind of domestic violence, talking to your children, telling them how stupid they are, they'll never amount to nothing. You act just like you're no good father. See, you keep putting those words into the mind, and the mind is eating them, digesting them, and it is forming a person after a word. So when the word becomes flesh and the flesh is in your house dwelling with you, ugly acting, bad acting, violent acting, you think that you had nothing to do with this. But sometimes we have to go right back and look at ourselves. Dear family, listen. The Bible is true. My people are destroyed not because they're black or poor. They're destroyed for the lack of knowledge. And I would respectfully say to those in domestic violence, see, all that we're talking about is our lack of understanding of God's purpose for a male and a female. And if we don't know what our purpose is as a woman, or our purpose is as a man, and how these two entities, male and female, were created by God to interact with each other to bring about peace and joy. You didn't hear me. But if the woman doesn't know her role, and the man doesn't know his role, nature gives it to you, not a book. You can't go pick this up in a book. I mean, we can put it in a book, but it's coming right out of yourself. There's something that every woman expects from a man. And that's why most of you as women are so dissatisfied in your relationships, because you are not getting from us what your nature demands. You are not an adulterous woman by nature. You commit adultery because the man is not acting. He's not fulfilling in your life what it is that you need, and you're looking somewhere else. The beginning of domestic violence. As a man, who are you? What is your role as a man? Not your role as a sex partner, your role as a man. What is that role? And if you and I don't know how to be what God created us to be, this woman will always have us before her and feel, oh my God, I've got to sentence this man to death. I've got to sentence this woman to something, because you don't know how to relate. This is not being taught in churches as it should. It's not being acted on. This is why, if I say, and I'm being very personal here, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, when he taught me who I was as a man, wow, that blew my mind. That as a man made in the image of God, I'm supposed to be a producer. That's right. That's right. I'm supposed to be one that provides not only material things for my wife and my children, but emotional security, mental security. How I use my mouth is very important in a relationship. When you call your wife a bee, what are you saying? What kind of mind do you have? And what kind of mind do you have as a woman to refer to yourself as that and refer to another woman as that? This is mental violence. See, our problem is ignorance. And that's why the scripture says, how can they know except they have a teacher? And how can they have a teacher except he be sent? The enemy that put you in this condition is not going to give you a teacher to get you out of it. It is God who has to send you a teacher. And when God intervenes and sends you a teacher, you got to have the eyes, the ears, the heart, the mind to receive that teacher. And all of this will vanish as it came.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.